Hello, my name is Toms. I'm with the hardware testing department here at MikroTik. In this video, I will explain how to centrally manage a network of our Wi-Fi 6 access points with the new version of CAPsMAN. Centralized management lets you have a single Wi-Fi interface configuration profile, connection log, radius authentication client, all in one place, even when deploying hundreds of separate Wi-Fi access points. MikroTik's tool for enabling this is called CAPsMAN, and with the release of our Wi-Fi 6 products, there's now a new version of it. The previous version of CAPsMAN was configured in the separate CAPsMAN menu, which provided a distinct way of configuring interfaces that are on other devices. Our new Wi-Fi configuration menu was built to handle both local and remote interfaces, so it includes the controls of the new CAPsMAN, which we will take a look at in just a moment. But before we do, it's important that everyone following along understands the concept of a configuration profile. If you have experience configuring one of our standalone access points from previous generations, you'll know that there, most configuration parameters, such as the SSID, are configured by setting their value on each interface, while security-related settings, such as the Wi-Fi password, are configured in a security setting profile. Each security profile can be applied to many interfaces, and changing the password in the profile will change it for all interfaces that the profile is applied to. With our new Wi-Fi configuration interface, every parameter belongs to a parameter category. For example, the channel category includes frequency and width of the radio channel, data path parameters affect the forwarding of data, and as before, security parameters govern authentication. And to change any parameter, I can either set a value directly on an interface, or create a profile for its category, and then apply that profile to one or more interfaces. If I do both, apply a profile and set a value directly on the interface, the directly set value will override the value in the profile. Profiles for parameters in the configuration category are special in that they let you include parameters or profiles from other categories to create one comprehensive profile. Let's create a configuration profile setting a regulatory domain, SSID, and specifying that it includes the security profile we created earlier. Applying this single profile to an interface will now set all the relevant settings just how I want them. So now I have a configuration profile that I can apply to many interfaces, but only two interfaces to apply them to. Let's turn on CAPsMAN and add some more. Any device running RouterOS can act as the central controller. It just needs to enable the CAPsMAN service in the CAPsMAN menu, which for this new version of CAPsMAN is found in the general Wi-Fi configuration screen in the Remote CAPs tab. The controlled AP, or CAP as we call it, regardless of the model name, can be connected to the controller manually or by resetting it. If the device does not contain any configuration you would like to retain, you can reset its configuration, enabling CAPs mode. This will apply a modified default configuration which will lead the device to look for a controller on the local network and hand over the management of its Wi-Fi interfaces to it. But setting up the connection manually gives you a better understanding of how it works and lets you create more advanced setups. So let's quickly go through how that's done. In the CAP menu, enable connecting to a controller, and in the Discovery Interfaces section, specify which interfaces the device is allowed to use to establish this connection. This setting allows you to set it so that communication between the controller and the CAP only occurs over a separate management VLAN, for example. If the controller is in a different network entirely, you can specify an IP address to connect to. Then, for each interface that you want to manage through the controller, in their configuration, set the manager parameter to CAPsMAN, and in their data path settings, specify the bridge to which Wi-Fi interfaces should be added as a port when operating. The management connection is secured with TLS certificates. By default, the controller automatically generates a certificate authority and issues certificates for itself and connected CAPs. When you have finished setting up a production network, you can stop the automatic issuing of certificates by configuring the controller to require connecting CAPs to have a valid certificate. You can also use certificates from a separately managed certificate authority. With my connection now active, I can apply the configuration profile I created earlier to the CAPs interfaces as well. But if I planned on adding a lot more CAPs to my network, I could set my controller to automatically apply the needed configuration profiles to the interfaces of CAPs that connect. This process is called provisioning, and it can provision interface configurations as either dynamic or static. Dynamic interface configurations are discarded whenever the connection between the controller and the CAP is interrupted, like during OS upgrades, and provisioned anew when the connection is re-established. Dynamic interfaces also can't have their configuration profile parameters overridden by setting them directly on the interface. So if you find yourself inadvertently changing the settings on an interface when you meant to change them on the profile, consider keeping your interfaces dynamic. Non-dynamic interfaces work much like manually added configurations. They persist between system upgrades of the controller and the CAP and can be altered by the user after provisioning. The provisioning tool allows you to specify a list of rules, so you can provision different configurations to different CAPs depending on their IP addresses or identities, or different interfaces on a CAP depending on their supported bands. For example, I would like to limit my 2.4 GHz interfaces to operating on the 3 non-overlapping 20 MHz wide channels available to me. For this, I can create a new configuration profile where I limit the channel parameters accordingly, and then add a provisioning rule at the beginning of the list, which states that interfaces which support the 2.4 GHz band should be provisioned this configuration. So far, I've been provisioning one configuration for each physical CAP interface, but obviously there are situations where I would like each physical interface to host additional APs, such as a separate network for potentially less secure IoT devices, or an open AP for guests. Automatic provisioning of virtual APs can be done by specifying additional slave configurations. The master configuration is special in that it will be the one determining radio channel settings, since a radio can only be operating on one channel at a time. Starting with router 7.13, any slave interface is by default added to the same bridge as the master. But if you're running an older version, or if you want your virtual APs to be added to a different bridge, you have to set the correct datapath profile in the slaves datapath section of the CAP menu. Finally, an important aspect of keeping your network secure and functional is keeping devices updated. To facilitate this, a CAPsMAN controller can automatically upgrade CAPs that it manages, so that their router OS version matches that of the controller. If all the packages needed to upgrade the CAPs are installed on the controller, then it can provide them to CAPs for this purpose automatically. But it's common for CAPs to have different CPU architectures and different driver packages than the controller, in which case you'll need to fetch the correct packages and store them on the controller. If you already have a network managed by the previous version of CAPsMAN, note that this new version was designed for use with our Wi-Fi 6 and future products, and unfortunately it was not feasible to make it compatible with Wi-Fi 4 and early Wi-Fi 5 access points. Those still need to be managed by the previous version of CAPsMAN, but that version is still supported as part of the wireless software package, and starting with router 7.13 you have the option to run both versions simultaneously on the same controller. That about covers the concepts that you need to understand to centrally manage the latest generation of our Wi-Fi access points. If there are any other topics you would like us to cover, let us know and stay tuned.